Good morning. It's October 14th, 2010, and we're here, we being Betsy Wilcox and me, Barbara Boyle, to interview Louise Clark on her lifetime in Lafayette. Louise, let's begin. Could you give me your full name and any nicknames or?
I was born Louise Harvey, and my family called me Weezy.
Weezy?
Yes. I picked up the last name when I was at the University of Chicago, where I met the man that became my husband, Johnson Clark.
And so, you're, tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up in Chicago. Did you grow up in Chicago?
I grew up in Chicago. I was one of four girls of James C. Harvey and Rhea Carson Blake Harvey. We did all girlish things, even though my father really did want a son. So he treated my older sister as a boy. He taught her to shoot and wrestle and box and all those things that a father does with a son. And she turned out to be a lovely girl anyway, and the rest of us didn't have to worry about those things because that was all taken care of. So we just did girly things like playing the piano and dancing, and that was it. I went to a girls' school, Faulkner School for Girls, until I went to the University of Chicago. And my parents were a little concerned that I might meet somebody that they might not approve of. They had heard rather frightening things about the university. They were afraid I might maybe meet a Democrat, which I happened to do, and I did happen to marry them. But they became reconciled to that, and for the last vote of my father's life, when he was 99 and a half years old, he did vote for the first Democrat in his life. And so, of course, he went to heaven at age 99 and a half.
And how long have you lived in Lafayette now, and how did you happen to come here?
My husband was in the Navy, stationed on Treasure Island. He loved California. When he was mustered out of the Navy, he went back to Chicago, went back to his old job, and decided no, he wanted to live in California. So we packed up our belongings and we moved to Berkeley. We bought the house that his sister had lived in when she was stationed in the WACs, and her husband was in the Army, and they were mustered out of the service in Berkeley. So we bought their house for $10,000, which was a very large sum of money. But we just were able to scrape together that money and bought the house.
Was this in what year?
This was in 1948. We did love Berkeley, except for the fact that we lived there 5 very foggy years. The children, we had 4 children while we lived in Berkeley. The children would nap between 1 and 3, the only time that the sun would come out in Berkeley. A friend dropped by, and I was moaning to her about the fact that there was no sunshine. And she said, there is a place called Lafayette, and they call themselves the Sunshine Valley. I'm going to take you there. So she had me close my eyes. She drove me through the tunnel. She didn't take me to Lafayette. She took me to the top of the hill overlooking St. Mary's College, and then said, open your eyes. I did open my eyes to beautiful sunshine. It was foggy in Berkeley, and said, this is it. We didn't move to St. Mary's College. We moved to Lafayette, the Sunshine Valley.
And that was 1940?
That was in 1952.
And so you had 4 children at that time, and you had one more child out here?
Well, 2 more children out here. But when I moved out to Lafayette, I thought Lafayette was the perfect place to live, except they did not have any Parent Participation Nursery Schools, which we had in Berkeley. So I went to the school district and I said, well, no, we don't do that. And they want that, go back to Berkeley. So my husband and I, realized how important it was, how much we had learned how to parent children when we went to the Parent Participation Nursery School in Berkeley at Thousand Oaks. So I put a notice in the paper that there was going to be a meeting of people interested in starting a nursery school, and 16 people showed up. 2 of them were attorneys, and we incorporated and started having nursery school classes, first in our homes and then we went to the Methodist Church. We used some space there. We had some of our nursery school at the Old Town Hall, and finally found a house on First Street where we could move the children into our permanent home for the nursery school. We had a termite inspector check the house for termites, and he gave it a 2 thumbs up, so we bought the house. And then it turned out he had inspected the house next door. The house we had built was held together by termites. It had to be torn down. We had paid $10,000 for it, but we decided that we were paying $10,000 for the lot. It was a very handy spot in the middle of town, and we felt just right for a nursery school. So we tore that down and built the nursery school from the ground up. I designed the building, and John built it. Well, he was the building contractor. But everybody that was a nursery school parent participated in building that building. And some of them still talk about it today. One of them being Art DeGrazia, who was one of the principals of the garbage company. His children were in nursery school, and he was one of the participating fathers tearing down the old building and putting up the new building. I still see some of the early members. One of them was Amy Dooling. Amy and Bud had children there, and they're still dear friends.
And after the nursery school, would you say that was one of your reasons for becoming active in affairs, activities in Lafayette?
Yes, there was a need for a nursery school, and nobody was doing it, so somebody had to.
So that piqued your interest in getting active in a lot of other activities, as I understand.
Well, then the children went from nursery school into first Lafayette School, where close. That was the elementary school near where we lived. Then we moved to the present location where we have lived for 52 years, and we went to Vallecito School, which is no longer a public school, but at the time, it was a very wonderful public school for my children. While the children were there, I realized they were singing commercials, not due to the school, but just when they were in 4th and 5th grade. They were vocal and listening to television, radio, and they picked up all the commercials for cigarettes. And that really bothered me because I knew cigarettes could kill people. My husband and I had never been smokers, but his father was dying of emphysema, and I had a younger sister that knew she would die of lung cancer from smoking, as she did. I didn't want my children to smoke. So there was a team of 2 men from Seventh-day Adventists who were going around to schools with a smoking dummy. It was a mannequin of a 12-year-old girl they called Smoking Sue. I decided that I wanted to take that dummy around to the PTA schools in Contra Costa County and show the children why they should not smoke. I got some dried lung specimens from the Cancer Society, showing one dried lung specimen was of a normal lung, and it was pinkish gray, and it looked like a pinkish gray sponge. The other 2 lungs were from smokers. One of them was black and was a lung with cancer, and it looked pretty awful, and the other one looked even worse, and it was a lung with emphysema. It looked like a sponge that had been really destroyed. I took that around, and the Smoking Sue, had her mouth drilled to smoke a cigarette, and tubing going into 2 mason jars in her back. Her back was cut out so the children could see the smoke going from the cigarette in her lips into the lungs, which were mason jars with angel hair, white angel hair in the jars. After a while, after Sue had smoked several cigarettes, the angel hair was no longer white, and eventually there was tar on the bottom of the jars. Tar the same that you can see on the street. And that was really impressive to the children. They didn't want tar in their lungs. Years later, some adults would see me on the street and tell me that they had seen the smoking Sue, and it had convinced them not to start smoking. One of the teachers also told me a year later. I had gone to one school and then went back a year later, and the teacher told me that she had watched the demonstration and she hadn't had a cigarette for that year. So I was very pleased with that, and my children never did smoke.
This is also interesting, but we'll start with the next question here. I've already asked you what motivated you to become interested in community activities. One of the present things that you have started is, how did the Crosses of Lafayette get started?
My husband and I were on a cruise with Bob and Hilma Heaton, who live on Spring Hill Road and have lived there as long as I've lived here, or longer. We were cruising down the coast of eastern California, the eastern United States. On March 19, 2003, one night, the captain called us all into the lounge, saying that our president was going to have an address to the country, and he wanted us all to hear that. And that was the announcement that President Bush made, announcing our troops, our bombers, our planes were bombing Iraq. Shock and awe. It was horrifying to me to listen to that. And after the president had spoken, there was no sound for the 100 passengers assembled in the lounge. And I stood up and I said, but nobody in those planes that bombed the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, nobody came from Iraq. We're bombing the wrong country. And then I sat down, and nobody talked about it the rest of the trip, except the Heatons and the Clarks. When I got home, the Heaton's son, Jeff, came over to my house and sat right here with me and John, and said he was just as concerned as his parents about what was happening. And our soldiers were being killed, our troops were being killed, and nobody was really doing anything, being concerned about it. It was just not something that was getting the attention it should get. So he asked if he could put some crosses on my hill, Johnson, my hillside, for each one of the soldiers that had been killed. And by that time, this was right afterwards, and so there were a number, maybe in that first 2 days, maybe about 19, I think. So he started putting up crosses. He put up two crosses, and the next morning they were gone. And the next day he made some more crosses and put them up, and the next day they were gone. So he came back and he said, well, I guess I can't do it. It's just people are not accepting it. So he didn't do anything until November 11, Armistice Day, 2006. So this was 3 years later. And by this time, 3,000 of our soldiers had been troops. It wasn't just soldiers, Navy, airmen, and women were over there. Over 3,000 had been killed. And he said, I can't stop it. I can't stand it. I have to do something. And I suggested he call in helpers. He couldn't do 3,000 crosses. so I suggested he call the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center, and grandparents for peace in Rossmore, and there's an organization in pretty much Orinda, but also Lafayette, another peace and justice organization. So he called them, and the word got around, and over 100 people have put in the time, sawing up the crosses, nailing them, putting them together, painting them, digging the holes, planting them. Over 100 people have worked on the crosses that you see today, and they continue working on it. The hardest job now is keeping the weeds down. It's really hard to do because you can't use the weed eater that most weed eradicating companies use. You have to cut by hand between each one of those crosses. It's a very hard thing, and Jeff and his fellow volunteers are still doing it.
Well, I know some friend of mine asked me how I felt when I drove there and saw that, and I thought, it's almost like a church experience.
Yes, it's almost like that. And people that see it, people that work on it, all have different reasons for doing it. I was there one time and nobody else was there. And a woman drove up and stopped. There's a red curb, you can't really park there, but she stopped, got out, went over to a cross with no name on it. Some of the crosses have names on them. She went over to a cross with no name and just stood there with her head bowed for a few minutes, and then she went back to her car and drove away. It's just a very powerful experience for people, not just people seeing it the first time, but people even working there.
What was the opposition to it?
They feel that it's anti-troops, but in a way, is it anti-troop? It's there because we are concerned that all of these people have died. They have died thinking that they were saving us from terrorism. And they don't get much recognition for what they did, for giving their lives. And we hope that this will be a little bit of recognition for them.
Yes. Betsy, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask for Louise?
I think they're doing just fine. Thank you. This is very interesting. I'm enjoying it.
Do you miss anything about the way Lafayette used to be?
Lafayette used to be the way I interacted to Lafayette with my children. Lafayette had, first it was LYA. My children were very active in swimming. They loved LYA, became LMYA with Moraga later. It was probably the most important part of their lives for 5 years or so while they were active on the swim team. One daughter, Candy, was very quick. She was like a wind-up toy. You put her in the pool, and she would start kicking before she hit the water. And she got a state recognition for the fastest time for 6-year-olds, 6 and under, for 25 yards. She did that in 17 flat, and the record held for 12 years. When she was 8, she had decided that she wanted to go to the Olympics in swimming. And then she realized she had a year being serious about swimming where you have to swim all year outdoors. And she realized, no, she got too cold. She would not go to the Olympics in swimming. But she had already convinced herself she was going to go to the Olympics. So when she was 15, she changed and decided she was going in her kayak. And she did. She was in the Montreal Olympics in 1776 in her kayak.
So does she still keep up with kayaking?
She still does kayaking.
Even though she has, 3 children now?
She has 3 grown children. One of them is just leaving NASA. He was in Mountain View. He had been assigned the Mars landing, and he was very disappointed when the government funding was cut off for the Mars landing. So now he's looking for a job in the public sector. But it won't be as exciting. Nothing will be as exciting to him as the Mars landing. Candy's second child is just starting law school in Boulder, Colorado, and I was a little disappointed that she'd go into law school, but she said that she's going into environmental law, and she wants to save the world through environmental law. A little before this, she was concerned about lymphoma. I have lymphoma, and I am under treatment for it, and I will be in remission at the end of the treatment in December. She felt that she could help my lymphoma by doing team in training Ironman. So middle of summer, there was an Ironman event for which she had to raise money, and she did, in order to be involved. The Ironman involved swimming 2.4 miles, then riding a bicycle for 12.4 miles, and then running a full marathon, 26 point some miles, in one day. She did it in 14 hours. She survived. 700 people did this. They didn't all make it. 500 made it, and Sarah was one of those. She was not the winner, but as they said, everyone is a winner because the funds go to the Lymphoma Leukemia Society. So she's hoping that people there will eventually be maybe something to prevent these diseases, and if not, it will cure them. Right now, it just puts them in remission. But at my age, that's not too bad.
Yeah, we're young at heart, aren't we?
What's that?
We're young at heart.
Yes.
I have a question. Louise, tell us about this beautiful home and spot. Did you build the house, and was there anything here before, and a little bit about your neighborhood?
This is the neighbor house just above mine, where Jennifer Russell grew up. Jennifer is our recreation director for the city of Lafayette. She has been the director for 31 or 2 years. Last year, the city had a recognition of her 30 years service and gave her a big party. Jennifer Russell grew up next door in the main big house that was here in the E.K. Wood estate. It was 16 acres, a great big swimming pool and tennis court, and when John bought it from Harvey Lyon, who had bought it from E.K. Wood, he decided that it was the pool and tennis court were really so wonderful they should be shared by the neighborhood. So he set it up that the 34 families whose homes are built around and the 16 acres would all be owners and participants in the use of the pool and tennis court. It's been a wonderful place for the children to grow up, and there are no fences, and just except around the pool and the tennis court. The tennis court fence isn't quite high enough because occasionally a ball does go over the fence and into the pool, but not very often. So the children grew up with all the neighborhood children, and mothers taking turns watching them at the pool. It was a very wonderful place for children to grow up.
So, in other words, John bought 16 acres, including the house.
Including that house, yes.
Louise, did you build
And so
this?
we built this house. I designed it, and John built it.
Lovely. Do you know anything about Mr. Wood?
Yes, he was a lumberman, and his wife was killed driving down the driveway of the home, which is now Juniper Drive. You came up Blackthorn, but just Blackthorn goes into Juniper, and Juniper went onto Mount Diablo Boulevard before there was any freeway. So that was the main road going into Lafayette. It wasn't very busy when she was killed, but cars came along fast enough.
I thought she was killed coming out of the tunnel. No?
Coming down the driveway, where it was Mount Diablo Boulevard. So that made this not a very happy place for him. So he sold to Harvey Lyon, and Harvey and Eleanor lived here for a while, and then they moved to Piedmont Gardens, because Lafayette does not have a senior residence that will that is designed for people who don't need support, government-supported housing. Lafayette has a very fine chateau. It's 65 units of senior housing for seniors who don't have enough money to live in it's a subsidized housing. I'm on the board, and I enjoy going to the meetings, and several other residents are very good friends. It's something that Lafayette needs for seniors that don't have the money to pay market rate, but Lafayette also needs a market rate place like Piedmont Gardens. And our mayor, Barbara Langlois, was not able to find a place to live in Lafayette, so she and her husband moved to Piedmont Gardens. We need something like that in Lafayette.
I didn't realize that, and so how come you got interested in that? Louise
We had hoped to build that. And
so was that where the crosses are now?
Yes.
Originally was going to be senior housing?
Yes, we had thought that it would be ideal for us when we couldn't drive anymore, we could get on BART. And it really would have been.
Mm-hmm.
The impetus for that is no longer here because John is no longer here. But when I look at the Crosses Yell, I think of him, and I think of that really would be a good place for market rate senior housing.
How did John get interested in contracting? Had he had that in mind all the way along when he came from Chicago, or not?
When we married in Chicago, he was working for S&C Electric Company, and he felt that maybe that was not his future career, and so he talked to my father about a career for him. And my father had always wanted to be a builder. My father was a real estate man in Chicago, and so he suggested that when we go out we told him we were going to California. He suggested that California was booming, and that John really would be happy being part of that boom of construction. And it turned out that yes, he was. He was very happy in the boom of construction, and it was just right for him. He would start with a piece of land, and he would find an architect, and they would go over the plans, and eventually end up with something that somebody could move into. And he made a lot of friends that way. A lot of our friends became our friends when John built houses for them.
Was this in this area or
Lafayette, Rinda, Moraga, and one in Pleasantville.
Did he ever build any homes for your children?
No. Well, yes, he tried to build one for one of our daughters, but it didn't work out.
Well, you have a lovely setting here.
Thank you.
Where do you see Lafayette going in the future, since you've been such an integral part of where it is today?
I think the people who live in Lafayette really want it to stay pretty much the same way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see a little more opening of the creeks. I have been to San Luis Obispo, and I just love their downtown. Yes, they have a creek in the middle of downtown, and they have cleared away the shrubbery, and people can go down there and they can walk along the creek. There's a little restaurant down there. And Lafayette has a creek in downtown, and I would love to see our town utilize that creek.
well, didn't the general plan do that or not?
They were talking about it with the downtown plan.
Yeah.
But nobody seems to be as interested in that as I am. Maybe they just haven't seen what it can look like, and I wish everybody would go look at San Luis Obispo.
I'll have to take a drive sometime.
Oh, it's worth it.
Oh,
It's just
beautiful.
so charming.
Is it really? Betsy, do you have any more questions you'd like to ask?
I'd like to ask Louise if she has any stories that she'd like to share with us that we haven't touched on at this point.
Well, I have one that was not Lafayette. I was a board member of the Mental Health Association, and a head nurse of the county hospital came to our board meeting and said, there's something very bad in the county jail. She said that her nephew had a fix-it ticket that he had not taken care of. He was an 18-year-old kid. And boys can ignore things like that. He did. And he was picked up on a Friday night, put in the old jail. This was 35, 40 years ago. Put in the old jail, which you can see is a little dungeon across from the county building. They were the supervisors meet. And he was not released until Monday, when he could be arraigned and pay a fine for whatever the infraction was for which he was incarcerated. He had been raped in the cell. The cells were monkey cages, 8 men to a cell. So they took turns raping the kid. And he was so traumatized when he got out, he hung himself. And it was a terrible blow to the family. And the head nurse wanted the Mental Health Association to see what they could do about the plans for the new jail, which had the same situation, monkey cages with 8 men to a cell. So John and I went to the architect, Confer, the big architect who was doing the plans for the jail, and we told him that we were concerned about the 8 men to a cell. And so Mr. Confer said, well, okay. So he crossed off the 8 and made it 6. And then we realized that there's something wrong with that architect who was designing something that would be so disastrous to the people that were locked up. I convinced the sheriff to give me a list of who was in the jail, not the names. I just wanted to know why they were in there. And 55% of them were in there for violations of the vehicle code. Now, it could be a faulty windshield wiper, a bald tire, and of course you don't want a faulty car on the road. So impound the car, don't lock the kid up in a situation where he's going to be so maligned and so destroyed. The sheriff agreed that the kids, they were mostly 18-year-old kids, and the jail was full of 18-year-old kids. And so the sheriff was saying, well, everybody agrees we have to have a new jail, and that's what the architect is working on right now. But, of course, the architect was working on the wrong kind of jail, and at that time there were national guidelines saying 1 person per cell. Every cell has to have an outside window, and the one that the Confer architect was designing was a Bastille, 100 feet tall, solid concrete, walls 3 feet thick, no windows. It was so incredible. And so when I asked the architect about why it should be such a secure building for people who were in there for violations of the vehicle code, he said, well, there could be we're protecting them from the outside. There could be a lynch mob on the outside that wants to get at these people on the inside.
For having a bald tire.
Yeah, and it was just, the whole thing was just ridiculous overkill. And the national guidelines said every cell had to have an outside window. And the cells could not look like monkey cages. They had to have privacy with a window where the guards could look in, but not the total exposure of the full bar door. So the supervisor said, "No, we can't do that. We're too far along, and Mrs. Clark, you're costing us $3,000 a day by holding up this jail." And I said, "But you can't build this jail because it's unconstitutional to do this to people." So the supervisors were not convinced. And by this time, through some letters to the editor, there were people that were concerned. I went around to every church and told them what was happening and said, "This is not what we want happening to our young people." And so we got a petition, and we got it on the ballot, and we won. That the county could not build a jail that did not conform to national guidelines, which said every cell had to have an outside window, one person per cell, etc., etc. So we got it.
And when was that completed? The new jail?
It was about 35 years ago.
Oh, not so new anymore.
No, and it was great celebration, and the supervisors all took credit for this wonderful jail they had built, and the sheriff was so proud of his new jail, and they had a grand opening, and they invited all the people who had worked on the jail, the supervisors, and invited me to come spend the first night in the jail, which I did. And it was, if you don't take care of your fix-it ticket and they put you in jail, then it's not that bad. But it's really better to take care of your fix-it ticket and not go to jail at all.
Anything else, Betsy?
I can't think of anything else.
I think we've seen a life that was filled with purpose and helping other people with Louise.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful.